welcome to Words That Matter, a modern day book club. I am Lee Smith, your host. We talk about the different things that have happened in American cities, certainly since COVID, but even beforehand. We saw the George Floyd riots in American cities. Lots of blue areas have cleared out. People have gotten, people have felt pushed out. They felt cornered, and they've looked for freedom. Still in America, but outside of the blue areas they may have been raised in, that they may have spent most of their lives in, and they have found safety and freedom, as well as friendship and love all across the country in red states. So it's about the internal migration in the United States. The author is our friend Roger Simon. The book is American Refugees, the Untold Story of the Mass Exodus from blue states to red states. Roger, welcome. Happy New Year. Thank you for being here. Congratulations on your great new book.
Well, I hope so. I hope it's well received. I thank you for having me. This is an experience that I know you lived to some degree as well. Yeah. And, we're not alone
No.
At all. One of the interesting things I discovered, to me, writing a book is partly telling your own story, always, even if you're doing what you think is the most rigorous journalism. The author is still, in your case, for example, I read a book of yours before I ever met you, and I think that I knew you some from that. I met it now, but when I did this, what passed for the research of this book for a long time, I'm not really an investigator, I'm just more of a writer. I was speaking to people over time because everyone was asking me, people back in LA or New York principally, how is it around Nashville? And what about Franklin? And all these other questions about implying that they were thinking of moving. And you realized after a time that there were some people who had never moved. And then there were others probably who had moved already. So now it's an interesting psychological thing because I'm sort of jumping ahead here because this is sort of in my mind.
Well, that's great. Go ahead. But I think it's probably best if we lay this out and if you tell your personal story, then we'll get into you just talked about from LA to Nashville. So if you just explain that, then let's get into psychological stuff, I think.
Okay, fine. My personal story is that way back in the early Paleolithic age, somewhere around 1970, I went out to Los Angeles because I wanted to work in the movies. And, behind me are movies posters. I actually did work in the movies for a while, but the city of Los Angeles and my own political views both simultaneously went in the opposite direction. That meaning that I went out there a liberal and gradually became less so. And at the same time, the city, which was back in the 70s and 80s, a glorious place to live, it was turning completely sour to the point that, on my regular run to bring my daughter to school, I'd see people defecating in the streets. And on top of that, because I had started in my own political migration, something called then Jarvis Media, now still existing as PJ Media, people didn't like what I did personally. Very much. I became an apostate in that society. Muslims aren't the only ones who don't like apostates because they threaten people. And so I received in my mailbox a scrawled message, "We know where you live."
Whoa.
Which was kind of an early version of doxing, I guess you might call it.
Yeah. Wow.
Anyway, but it took quite a number of years before we actually moved, but boy, it was in our heads. And, eventually we decided my wife and daughter and I decided we were going to decamp. We lived in a lovely home in the Hollywood Hills. I mean, it wasn't really fancy, but it was quite in a beautiful spot and everything else. It looked like a screenwriter. It was screenwriter wife lived there. I mean, you would know that in a minute. But you know, gradually the homeless were coming down from Mulholland Drive, the famous Mulholland Drive. So you couldn't walk the dog in the morning. Anyway, it was time to go. So we were trying to figure out where, and I actually wanted to go to live in Charleston, where you live.
That's right.
But I got outvoted by my wife and daughter who wanted to go to Nashville, in part because they were country music, paleo country music fans. I like country music. They like,
right.
you know, for urban Californians, which they both are, they're very much into it. In fact, remarkably. Anyway, so that gave Nashville an extra vote. I had nothing against Nashville. The other thing was that it's a, you know, creative place. People are, you know, it's a music city. So we thought that we wouldn't be lost there, as it were. But as I write in the book, there were many big surprises. We were incredibly naive about it, I have to say. And I don't consider myself a general naive person, but we thought that Nashville itself, the city, would be purple, you know, in a blue, obviously a red state. Turned out to be as blue as Los Angeles in a lot of ways. The city itself, although the state is, of course, went 2/3 for Trump in 2020, so it's very red. But the experience of that was kind of interesting because you could see when we arrived, we started to see that the war for the control of America was very much on in Tennessee, and that the desire for you know, of the left to take over the country was playing out. I mean, there was nothing more than they would want to turn Tennessee blue. They haven't, of course, but it's definitely in the air. And one of the interesting things, it didn't. And now in the book you see it, but I'm not an expert in what you would call Tennessee lore, especially when I arrived. And I didn't realize how recently many of these southern states had flipped red. They're actually, you go back very short, and Tennessee maybe 12 years or something. And actually, Marsha Blackburn, the senator who was in the book and someone I know, was involved in that flip because the flip was sort of solidified when when it was blocked, when state income tax was blocked. Which leads me to a part of the subject of the book is a discussion of whether refugees, and as I call them, who come from these blue states to the red states, like yours as well, were motivated financially or ideologically. And it is my contention that the ideology was more important than people realized. And this created an interesting conflict that is still ongoing in the state and in several other states. And it's, in fact, I would say there were 4 states that I really delved into a lot in the book. One is Georgia, which is the most problematic. Texas, a bit problematic. Florida and Tennessee, less problematic. But all of them have the same issue of who's coming and for what reason. The idea, the original thought by locals was, oh no, they're all going to come here with their California values and affect the place.
Right.
And in reality, the more I interviewed the people, I interviewed myself in this, I have to say, and that's not a fair statistic, it's just me. So, is that what really motivated them more was what you were discussing at the beginning, which was a search for the America that we all thought we lived in.
Yeah.
And that meant that many of these refugees were more constitutionalist, to use the simplest way of phrasing it, than the locals,
Hmm.
many of whom, especially the political figures, were the old Southern Democrats wearing new clothes. So there are elements of corruption, one hand washing the other, blah, blah, blah. And so these people came into conflict. It's an interesting.
That's that's fascinating. So a lot of people in these areas think the real conflict, as you said, is going to be between all these people coming from blue states or blue cities, more specifically, bringing their blue city ideas after, they're like locusts, right? That's the phrase.
Right.
Like, and they've ruined LA, they've ruined Manhattan, they've ruined Brooklyn, Boston, Chicago, whatever. Now they're going to come to Nashville, they're going to come to Charleston, they're going to come to wherever. I mean, most of the cities in Texas, I believe, are blue anyway, right?
Yeah.
But the concern is that they're going to be leftists. And in fact, you're saying that, no, these are serious people who are ideologically committed to the right. They don't want the nonsense happening that happened in their own, in the states they fled. And they are so intent to protect their new home that they come into conflict because a lot of the Republicans who are already there, maybe wouldn't call them exactly rhinos, but you're saying they just happen to hold positions and they're not actually very committed as conservatives, or as you put it, as constitutionalists. That's fascinating. I don't think I would have imagined that. But I do know neighbors who are worried.
If you take one step back from it, there's a logic to it. And here's how I explain it. California had more Trump voters than any state in the country. The reason is obvious. It's by far the biggest. So therefore, there were a lot of people who did, when we think of the typical California progressive, there's zillions of them. But on the other hand, there's a lot of people who weren't. And so those are the people who are motivated to get out. The other thing is that going out cross country, whether to South Carolina, Tennessee, or Florida, or anywhere, even from New York, moving is a big project. You don't do it casually, especially if you have a family and all that. I mean, and because of that, you have to have a little bit more motivation than saving something on taxes. By the way,
yeah,
you didn't really do it because probably the cost of the move made up the difference in the first year or two anyway. So it's really a long-term saving in the Senate.
So how I mean, I just want to come back to the book for a second. I mean, we're talking generally about the book and what
I mean, this is not just
right. So what were the things? What else surprised you as you were speaking to people? Did you expect to find that more of your neighbors would be, if not hostile, they would be suspicious of you? Well, here comes. And by the way, I should say very quickly that you moved to Los Angeles and you became a very successful screenwriter. So it wasn't just that you were living the screenwriter's life. I mean, that was your profession. You're a novelist. You're a screenwriter. So when you moved, when you came to Tennessee, when you came to Nashville, you expected people to be a little suspicious of here's a guy, here's the big screenwriter guy coming down here. How did they receive you, and the people you spoke with for the book? How did they receive most of their new neighbors?
That's a good question because there are a lot of people who responded differently. But I mean, my first shock upon moving was how nice everybody was. Because I had lived in New York and Los Angeles all my life, which are probably the two most competitive places in the country. I think because, with DC in a different way, but that is a tripart. I was used to people with their dukes up, not physically, but
in New York they have their dukes up physically. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, not at all. And so actually, I am not, the way I was received was very well. And people were glad to see you. You go into the supermarket, you go to the Whole Foods here in Greenville, and then, the first week you're saying, you're telling the checkout woman that you just came in and blah, blah, blah. And they're saying, welcome, that was great. Where'd you come from? Welcome. And it was like, hey, the problems began later. And the problems were, in my case and in others, that we opened our big traps. That we said, hey, wait a minute, about some of the things that were going on. That causes issues. But initially, no. And the other thing is that I'm an avid tennis player. So I immediately joined a club to play tennis, and I was totally welcomed by all the guys. I think that the South in general, which has had a reputation of being, a more home-oriented religious place. In fact, my book concludes with what I think is the biggest change in my life from having moved from Los Angeles to the Nashville area, is that I have become more religious.
Roger, that's a good place for us to take a quick break. I want to pick this up when... this is great. I want to pick this up when we come back. We're going to cut away. For people who are watching on YouTube, please join us after the break. We're going to Epoch TV exclusively, and you don't want to miss a second. A great conversation about a really big issue about how lots of things are shifting in the United States, including populations. Right? We talk about illegal immigration. We talk about the horrors of that. But one of the very positive things that's happening is people are moving around and they're finding their communities around the country. People are moving from blue states to red states, and that's the subject of Roger Simon's great new book, American Refugees. And we'll be back with Roger in less than a minute. Please come back and join us after the break. See you real soon.
In the end, the party would announce that 2 and 2 made 5, and you would have to believe it. It was inevitable that they should make that claim sooner or later. The logic of their position demanded it. Not merely the validity of experience, but the very existence of external reality was tacitly denied by their philosophy. The heresy of heresies was common sense. And what was terrifying was not that they would kill you for thinking otherwise, but that they might be right. For after all, how do we know that 2 and 2 make 4? Or that the force of gravity works, or that the past is unchangeable, if both the past and the external world exist only in the mind, and if the mind itself is controllable? What then?